what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold. Yes, thank you. Apologies for a small break. I went on my honeymoon. Um, but in any way, shape, and form, we're going to be talking about and discussing a murder that is quite prevalent to the area that I grew up in Massachusetts. And I'm also going to give you an update in another case that heavily is connected to this case. So today we're going to be discussing the murder of Beth Brodie that happened in Groveland, Massachusetts. And I'm also going to be giving an update in the Amy Carnival case, which I already covered on this channel, the No One Would Tell case when it comes to her boyfriend or her boyfriend that killed her and him in jail and vice versa. You'll understand as to why I am discussing both at the same time a little later. So November 18th of 1992 was something 15-year-old Beth Brodie didn't know was going to be significant at that time in her life, because this unfortunately would be the last day of her life. Significant in the way that would leave a mark on her entire family as well. Beth lived in the small community of Groveland, Massachusetts. Groveland is in Essex County, Massachusetts, and it's roughly about 34 miles north of Boston. And this originally was the East Parish of Bradford, Massachusetts, which originally also was part of Rowley. Rowley was founded in early times, 1638. And this is when Reverend Ezekiel Rogers, who is heavily connected to my mother's side of the family. So thank you, Ezekiel Rogers, because my Boynton line and Boynton heritage follows deeply with that. He came and he was basically the start of the parish of Rowley, from Yorkshire, England, also over here. And thus, the original town of Groveland was called Rowley on Merrimack because the Merrimack River goes through it and basically separates that of Haverhill and Groveland is the Merrimack River. And then it turned into Bradford, and then Bradford was annexed from Haverhill. It's a whole long spiel. Anyway, that's besides the point. Groveland, Massachusetts became a separate town on September 9th of 1850, just to give you a small little tidbit of Groveland. Groveland is really cute. I would have to drive through it to go to Georgetown, which is where some of my family lived, Georgetown is also super cute as well. If you're not familiar with Massachusetts, these are small, tight-knit communities, and Beth Brodie's case has definitely left an impact on this case. This crime would devastate this small community. This is what's called a bedroom community, and it's so small because everybody knows everyone, and it's your typical small town that would be detected or depicted in a typical romance novel or in a thriller novel. This is how small it is. The ultimate biggest attraction of Groveland is called Cedardale Center, which is an activity center. It's actually quite nice. I went there a few times for birthday parties and sometimes swimming on the weekends. But for this town or this small community, um, anything would tear this town apart. And especially this murder of Beth Brodie tore this community apart. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of this in my intro, this case is very similar to that of the murder of 14-year-old Amy Carnival of Beverly, Massachusetts, which happened just 1 year earlier, like prior to this case. Amy Carnival was killed by her 16-year-old boyfriend, Jamie Fuller. Like I mentioned, this is a case that I already covered here on my channel, and I'm going to discuss the update of that later. Beth Brodie was one of 4 children to her parents. She was pure and simple. There's a quote of a poem that she had that's on her memorial website, and it basically says, "Your smile was bright, it lit up a room, and it's sometimes written about as being perfect." This is actually a poem that Beth wrote, and she gave it to her sister Dawn back in 1992. Most of these words in this poem are oftentimes brought up about Beth in many memorials about her. Others speak about her as being slightly shy, she was bubbly, and she was happy. She was full of life and friends. Beth was also a cheerleader at Pentucket Regional High School and was focused on her school year, and she didn't want to continue to date Richard Baldwin, who she had, casually gone on dates with a few times over the summer of 1992. So on the afternoon of November 18th of 1992, this is when 16-year-old Richard Baldwin of Peabody, of whom was crazed about the fact that she didn't want to be his girlfriend, he was violently obsessed with Beth. He had a plan that would forever change both of their lives. Beth was asked to go to a neighbor's house. This is Sky Hall. He's a mutual friend of both Beth and Richard. Sky didn't anticipate what was going to happen. There isn't a lot known about him other than this is in particular to Richard, if you will. There isn't a lot known about him other than his obsessive tendencies. When it came to Beth, he had just moved from the area and into another area at the time. So after Beth was asked to go to this friend's house, Richard also hold on, let me set this up. So Richard went to Sky's house and he was complaining about everything. Of what I would probably assume is his hell-bent obsession of Beth, but ultimately would then convince Sky to get Beth there for him so he could talk to her. Once Beth arrived, she would talk to Sky in the bedroom, and then Richard would come in and ask this question. I know he asked this question because I read part of the testimonies in court and the court docket itself and some of the documents that are available online. So Richard would come in and ask if they were afraid. This is such a strange way to greet anybody. Sky then would leave the room to, give them space so they could talk. And it's during this discussion, he would keep trying to get her to be his girlfriend. And when she didn't agree to be with him, he said very volatile, hateful things. And then he lifted an aluminum baseball bat that he brought with him and started to swing. Beth was so small, a small statured human, and her body literally could not handle the impact of the bat because of how small she was. There is one moment of this crime that he asked her, "Do you want to turn around for this?" This is also said in court as well. Sky ran to Beth's home to inform her family about what happened, and Richard then ran off in a cowardice way. He would run to the high school, take a handful of pills, and swallow it down with some wine that he had. He would admit to what he did to the principal of the school because the principal came out. And he then would be transported to the Hale Hospital due to the amount of pills or attempted suicide. And it was determined that he ingested a life-threatening amount of Xanax with the red wine. The Hale Hospital is also prevalent in my life because that's actually where I was born, where my father was born, where my husband was born, and a whole bunch of family members were born there. My father also worked there. It is not called the Hale Hospital anymore. It was called Merrimack Valley, but I'm pretty sure it's called something else now. Anywho, that's besides the point. It's also right around the corner from the Groveland Bridge. If you drive through Haverhill, past Haverhill Stadium, it will bring you to the Groveland Bridge and you will go into Groveland over the Merrimack River. So police in the hospital standing guard overheard Richard saying what he was saying, and it was no denying that he wasn't hiding what he did. He was, in the sense, was proud of what he did. And a huge amount of this is well documented. When Richard was being tended to, Beth was dying alone at Sky Hall's house. Her father would go there. He would go up to the bedroom where she was. Her dad then would do what any other father would do. He held her, and as she died, he held her after Sky told him what happened to Beth. Sky was used as a key witness in the case, but he wasn't tried. He did procure her to his home, but that was about it. Hence why they didn't charge him with anything. So this case is very interesting in the switch from juvenile case to being tried as an adult, and this took about a year for them to change the age bracket or the consensus in this case because of his age. And I'm pretty sure it's due to the premeditation, the manipulation, and how he got her there and the severity of the crime. That is why they tried him as an adult. So on April 4th of 1994, he was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. His defense would argue diminished capacity, but this was anything but when he committed what was premeditated homicide. What Baldwin asked of Beth was, when he was attacking her, it was brought up in court, like I mentioned, do you want to turn around for this? This is ultimate premeditation with that question. Do you want to turn around for this? Not something that somebody in the heat of the moment would say, unless you know exactly what you want to do. So he knew what he intended to do and knew what he was doing, hence why he was tried as an adult in the murder of 15-year-old Beth Brodie. Beth's family would be forever changed due to this crime, and how they have changed the coverage of crimes like this and how it changes the family. Sean Alward, sorry if I said your name wrong. This is her brother, Sean. He's featured on a podcast, Crime of the Truest Kind, in which he talks about how the struggle of keeping his sister's case prevalent to not let obsessive violence lead to murder, and how to keep Richard Baldwin in jail for the remainder of his life. Sean is very proactive in the community of keeping the memory of a victim alive instead of the memory of a killer alive. A lot of the time, there is dehumanization of the victim and victimizing the offender instead. This is a thing and is something that people don't realize that actually happens, even though they do it themselves. There are a ton of people who automatically assume that some can be rehabilitated, but in the case of Richard Baldwin, he has not been rehabilitated. There was a Supreme Court ruling, which a lot of people are aware of, in which juveniles found guilty and sentenced to life without parole were to be resentenced, or their cases were going to be reviewed. Among those cases is that of this case in Jamie Fuller, who killed Amy Carnival. So this Supreme Court ruling was more in effect in 2013. The resentencing for Richard Baldwin was up for review. Beth's family wasn't directly informed about this fact, which is talked about in that podcast episode. The family also had petitioned this as well. I would have probably petitioned it too. There were tiers for this crime. It all depends on the brutality of the crimes as well, in order to determine who needed to be resentenced when. So this year, 2024, Baldwin was up for parole, but parole did not happen. So it's during this most recent parole hearing that the DA disclosed during closing statements that Richard told his dad that he was planning to kill Beth, or had been planning to kill her for about a month prior to it happening. Since being in prison, he has not maintained being a good prisoner, good behavior. He has strangled someone twice. He has over 174 D reports, which is weapons and disobedience, blames others for his crimes. He's also committed over 50 suicide attempts. He beat a correctional officer so severely in 2008, and he still hasn't accepted responsibility for his actions. The only thing that Richard Baldwin asked was he asked his lawyer for leniency um, in regards to Baldwin going for intensive therapy for the whole parole process. And it's also known that during this parole hearing, it was noted that Richard was talking to himself, and he also just said that he would take back leaving his home that day and wouldn't take back the fact of killing Beth 32 years ago. So this crime is so close to home for me. I grew up in Haverhill. I know exactly where the Hill Hospital is. I grew up across the bridge from Groveland. I grew up hearing about this crime from my older cousins who lived in Georgetown or Groveland, and all of my family that lived around that area. I learned about the Amy Carnival case from a young age, not just on Lifetime with No One Would Tell. And a lot of these crimes that happen, very similar to these, a lot of them are being looked at right now. And it's because of the fact of these juveniles being sentenced to life without parole. A lot of them do deserve to still remain in prison. Jamie Fuller is one of them. He got resentenced to life in prison, all because of his behavior. And I'm very happy about that because he does not deserve to be out. Richard Baldwin does not deserve to be out as well. One of the parts of rehabilitation in prison is the fact of being able to understand what you did, being able to, it's not empathize with them, with your victims' families, but being able to stand in front of them, admit to what you did, take responsibility for your actions, and to be able to prove to people that you can change yourself while being in the custody of a law enforced area. Richard Baldwin has not proven that whatsoever. I mean, he's tried to kill a correctional officer. He strangled people. He's tried to kill himself. Clearly, there's something else that this man needs, which is probably further help in the BHP of a prison, which is the behavioral unit. If you don't know what BHP is, so behavioral health providers. He needs those, and therapy will help. Intensive therapy will help. Maybe there's other things he can get while he's still in jail for the remainder of his life that will help rehabilitate him. One of those things too is him accepting the fact that he planned a premeditated murder of the girl that he loved so extremely that didn't want him. And now her family has to live with the fact that this man killed this lovely, vivacious woman who loved her friends, loved life, loved being a cheerleader. This man took her life all because she didn't want him. Obsessive love is one thing, but murder is another. So that, my friends, is the Beth Brodie murder and the update in the Amy Carnival case. I hope you guys learned something from this. Definitely learned something from this, and I'll see you guys in my next one.